coil on the old stove was heating unevenly. It flickered, dimming, then glowing red again, as if it refused to work properly, cuck the whole roadside diner on the highway. Valerie, in a washed-out apron that had once been white and was now a tired gray, bent over the fish she had just dumped from an old ice crate onto a scarred wooden counter. You could barely recognize a sea bass in it. The fish stared up at the ceiling with its one remaining cloudy eye. Its dull, lifeless gaze matched this place perfectly. Behind her, the door slammed. Into the kitchen lumbered Peter Simmons, the owner of the establishment where Valerie had recently started working. A big, heavy man with a belly like a barrel and a face that was always flushed, as if he simmered every day in his own curses and spitting rage. "Where is she?" he barked, peering around the kitchen. Spotting Valerie, he jabbed a finger at her. You're supposed to be our cook or whatever you are. Come on, help out." He stepped closer, hissing in an almost threatening tone. "Today's lunch has to be perfect, you hear? We've got people in from a bank in the city. Big money, big plans. They said we want fish soup and baked fish, but make it fancy. And our so-called head chef, God forgive him, has been drunk for 3 days straight. You're the last one standing, so watch yourself. It better be edible. If you mess it up..." He jerked his chin toward the exit. "The door is right there, remember?" Valerie didn't lift her eyes, just gave a slight nod. Peter took that as agreement. "Good, then move it. Their table's booked for 8 o'clock, and it's already 6:30. He spun around and rolled back into the dining hall, swearing loudly about how he had to do everything himself, as always. Valerie was left alone. The kitchen was stifling. The ancient exhaust fan droned miserably, failing to pull away the smoke or the smell of burnt oil. On grimy shelves, dusty jars of leftover spices stood in crooked rows. Crystallized honey, a small bottle with no label, and a rock-hard lemon with a chalky pale patch on its side. All this was so far from where she had once worked, it was almost absurd. Not so long ago, her life had looked completely different. In Aix-en-Provence, among elegant streets and fragrant gardens, she had run her own restaurant. White tablecloths, silver cutlery, the soft rustle of refined conversation, these were the backdrop of her everyday life. Tables were booked months in advance, and her name was spoken in French with barely hidden admiration. In Les Papillons, people gave her standing ovations. A famous food magazine had once dedicated a whole spread to her. A sensation among female chefs, Valerie Morgan, the woman who conquered Provence. But all that fame, as it turned out, stood on a powder keg. When the restaurant burned down, nothing remained, only charred walls and emptiness. Technically, the insurance payout should have covered the damage, but all the paperwork had been in her French husband's name. He didn't waste any time, cashed the full amount, and disappeared. Barcelona opened its arms to him. To Valerie, he left nothing. He stopped answering calls, dodged lawyers, evaporated like smoke. And before we go on, let me introduce myself. My name is James Skye, and I wrote this touching story especially for you. Tell me in the comments which country and city you're listening from. And now, I wish you a pleasant listening experience. It wasn't just the restaurant that burned. Her former life burned with it. Everything she had built over years vanished in a few hours. With the money went her name and reputation, too. She had tried to save something from the blaze, and as a reminder, burns remained on her face. Nothing life-threatening, but noticeable. Her face had once appeared on advertising posters and glossy magazine pages. Now people looked at it with careful pity that made her want to sink through the floor. She returned to her home country. In the capital's restaurants, they politely turned her away. In the kitchen, sure, but not in the dining room, managers would say, avoiding her eyes. Humiliation upon humiliation, glance after glance. Eventually, she gave up. She no longer had the strength to prove anything to anyone. She only wanted quiet. That's how she ended up in the Provences, staying with her sister. No one there read gourmet magazines. No one knew who she was. The little cafe by the highway where she now worked wasn't meant for connoisseurs. People came in to buy cigarettes or ask where the nearest gas station was. Her sister had only shrugged. "Just hang in there, Val. Things will work out. But don't sit around doing nothing. Go at least earn a little." And so here she was, standing in a hot, smoky kitchen. A fish lay in front of her. The clock was ticking towards 8. Somewhere out in the hall sat important guests and her irritable boss, demanding from her far more than he had hired her to do. She dipped her hands into cold water and, slowly, almost ceremonially, began to clean the fish, just like back in the days when she studied in Lyon under a strict head chef who would not tolerate rush but always demanded results. Her movements were precise, controlled. Even the old, blunt fish scaler obeyed her hands. Her fingers were freezing from the cold water, but she didn't notice. All her attention was fixed on the work. She scanned the shelves for seasonings, for bay leaves, pepper, anything for a broth. She rummaged through the dusty jars, squinting at the faded labels, opening lids, sniffing the contents. At that moment, a young waiter appeared in the doorway. "Whoa, Aunt Val, you're actually cooking?" he asked hesitantly. "Do you need anything?" "Bay leaves, pepper, if there are any," Valerie replied, stretching her neck toward the shelves, but not stopping her search. The boy stepped closer, eyed the shelves, and then, without waiting for another question, began talking as if finally unloading after a long shift without a real listener. They were here somewhere, but Sam mixed everything up again, like always. He's the only one who knows where anything is, and now he's gone, not picking up his phone either. Ever since his birthday, he's been on a bender, 3rd day. The boss is losing his mind. No customers, no tips. The hall is dead. The kitchen is dead. Total boredom. At least when Sam was here, you could joke around. Now there's nothing but silence. While he rambled, Valerie silently continued sorting through the jars. In one, she found dried bay leaves. In another, black pepper. She straightened and looked at the talkative boy. "Got them," she said calmly. "But I also need dry white wine, any variety, as long as it isn't sweet, and a fresh lemon, without mold." The boy flushed. "Where am I supposed to get that here? But I'll try." He dashed out of the kitchen. Valerie, meanwhile, set water to boil with roots and trimmings. Not just a broth, a base. She threw in onions the previous cook had been about to toss. Rotten on the outside, strong and good inside. She knew how to pull the very best out of them. A wilted sprig of dill, a bit of yellow pepper. And suddenly, the air in the kitchen filled with a smell this building hadn't known for at least 10 years. The waiter returned, out of breath, holding out a bottle and a lemon. "Found them!" "Good boy. Thank you," Valerie said with the faintest hint of a smile. At exactly 8, 6 men sat at a table in the back of the hall. They were wearing dark suits without ties and speaking in quiet, businesslike tones. The eldest of them was flipping through a printed map covered in red markings. "Right here, by the turn onto the bypass, there's a good plot," he said softly but firmly. "Close to the highway, water and electricity are both there." "Yes, but the access road is narrow. A truck won't be able to turn around," another objected. "Mary promised to approve the road expansion," a third man added. "They say the local owner, Peter, might give up part of the land. The cafe itself is, well, a dump, but the spot, look, very visible." Peter Simmons, standing near the door, immediately stepped forward, grinning obsequiously. "Gentlemen, finally, welcome, welcome. I've heard you've got serious plans, and that's the right approach. My place has the best location, not like others. The lot is flat, the view is great, traffic is like on a city ring road. I've laid every brick here myself. The cafe runs like clockwork. Kitchen is top level. My cooks are like the ones in the best houses of Paris, he declared, clicking his tongue and puffing out his chest. The investors exchanged glances. One looked at the peeling walls. Another noticed the cracked sign outside. A third raised his eyebrows slightly. Yeah, the look of the place is something, the eldest said dryly. As for the kitchen, we'll see. Of course. I've got everything ready, Peter fussed. Tonight's menu, family-style fish soup and baked fish. I personally supervised everything. You'll lick your fingers. He clapped his hands. Bring out the first course, quickly. The waiter ran into the kitchen and seemed to vanish. Peter started to pace the hall nervously. He had placed a bet and was now terrified of losing. At last, the waiter reappeared with a tray. The men in expensive jackets began to taste the soup, spoonful after spoonful, in silence. One of them frowned, as if about to say something, but kept quiet. Another raised his brows slowly, nodded, took a sip of water, and said, "This is interesting." They leaned toward each other, whispering. Someone glanced towards the kitchen. Finally, one younger-looking investor turned to the owner. "Who's your cook?" Peter mumbled, "Just some woman, a helper of ours, relative of the cashier, I think." "Call her, please." Peter rushed into the kitchen like a man scalded. His eyes were blazing, his face mottled with red spots. "What did you cook out there, you witch?" he hissed, pouncing on Valerie. "They're sitting there pulling faces and keeping quiet. What did you give them?" He raised his hand as if about to hit her, but instead slapped the wall near her head, hard enough to make the utensils rattle. Valerie instinctively flinched but said nothing. His breath stank of alcohol. His voice was soaked in poison. He grabbed her by the elbow and shoved her toward the door. "Go, disgrace. They asked for you. Get yourself out of this mess." Valerie wiped her hands on a towel and walked into the hall. The room met her with silence. She took a step, and a barely audible sigh rippled through the hall, a sound made of surprise and pity at once. The harsh overhead light fell on her scarred face, and everyone could see the pale burn marks stretching from her cheek to her neck. But her eyes were calm, tired, yes, but steady. The young man at the end of the table rose first. "Did you make this fish soup?" he asked with genuine interest. She nodded. It was, he paused, searching for the word, astonishing. Such a clean taste, so clear, nothing unnecessary. It feels like a memory of a childhood you never had, but wish you had lived. The elder man, the one who'd been holding the map, stood up and started clapping, loudly. The others joined in almost immediately. Peter froze by the wall, turning pale. He looked as if the ground under his feet had shifted just a little. The older investor narrowed his eyes. "Excuse me, you wouldn't happen to be Valerie Morgan from Le Papillon?" he asked. She froze for a heartbeat, then gave a small nod. "Yes, that used to be me." "You're kidding?" he exclaimed with genuine delight. "There was that monkfish fillet with lavender sauce. I still remember the taste. I proposed to my future wife there. That was you?" She nodded again, slightly embarrassed. The men applauded once more. "This is the best fish soup I've tasted in 20 years, he said. "Tell me, do you currently have a job?" Peter tried to force himself into the conversation. "Well, actually, she works for us. She's mine, my staff." But Valerie was already looking at the investor, and he continued. "We are launching a new gastronomic project in the city, an author's restaurant in the center, under a closed brand, not just a bistro. And we don't just need a chef, we need a name, a soul. Do you understand? Would you like to lead the kitchen?" Peter, who had been hovering nearby, couldn't take it anymore and rushed to the table, smiling so widely it looked painful, as if everything happening was first and foremost about him. "Gentlemen, since things have turned out so wonderfully, maybe we can discuss my land offer too. You know, I own everything here. The building is mine, the land is mine, the kitchen is mine, and this cook, she's mine as well," he blurted, trying to sound confident, but his voice betrayed his tension. The senior investor slowly lifted his gaze. He studied Peter's face as if only now truly seeing who stood in front of him. "The kitchen may be yours," he said calmly, "but this remarkable woman is no longer yours." His words carried such weight that the silence in the hall became almost tangible. He turned to his colleagues and, after a short pause, added, "I think we've found everything we were looking for. I see no reason to tie ourselves to this establishment." The others nodded. The younger investor, without so much as glancing at Peter, turned to his assistant. "Make an offer to buy the land, minimum price. He'll sign the moment he realizes the only real value of this place has already left." But, Peter began, but his protest drowned under the heavy, unwavering stare of the older man. "Without him," the investor repeated firmly. Then he turned back to Valerie, his expression softening, his gaze warm and respectful. "Miss Morgan," he said, "it's time we start our work." A week later, Valerie was on a train. Outside the window, fields, dirt roads, and occasional village houses with sloping roofs slid by, fading into the autumn mist. Ahead lay something new, unknown, but exhilarating. Behind her were the soot, the clatter of cheap kitchenware, the harsh voices and coarse behavior she had been forced to endure day after day. She sat by the window, holding a fine cotton handkerchief between her fingers, and wondered how strangely life sometimes arranges the road you must walk just to meet yourself again. Not the old self, confident, famous, shining from the pages of magazines, but the one who gets back on her feet quietly, firmly, and relentlessly. In her mind, the day at the roadside cafe surfaced again. The young waiter, the one who had run for wine and lemon, caught up with her at the exit. He was nervous, speaking in rushed half-sentences, but his voice was full of genuine excitement. "It's a shame you're leaving," he had said. "Now I want it too. I don't know how yet, but I want to learn to cook like you, so that everyone around is amazed." She had smiled, patted his shoulder, and wished him luck. He had nodded in confusion, as if for the first time in his life believing that you really could just take and start something new and wonderful. She remembered her sister, who'd come to see her off at the station. She had hugged her tightly, silently, as if knowing that no words were needed. But then she whispered, softly, into her ear, "The main thing is, don't be afraid anymore. You've already survived the worst." Valerie's eyes had stung, but she only nodded and stepped into the carriage without looking back. Now the train rocked gently, the wheels tapping a measured rhythm. Valerie closed her eyes and allowed herself a small smile. There was a road ahead, and inside, at last, there was peace. And if this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.